just started talking about stuff, and she's like, oh yeah, we got 2 of them coming in, and the next day they were in. So they're having some difficulty connecting them to the new Wi-Fi system, but yeah, they're trying to get that worked out. But they have 2 of them.
Cool.
And they just have them just to have them, just for like people to come play with.
Of course.
So.
Yes. Well, the Vive is just released Vive Plus. I don't know if you've seen that.
I saw that too either last night or today. But yeah, the Vive Pro.
Pro, that's it. 78% higher resolution.
Yes. And it comes with the earphones built in. But apparently it doesn't also come with the remotes. You have to buy them separate.
$700 for just the set.
Yeah.
You still got to buy the 2 boxes that give you the spatial orientation and then the controller.
Yeah, so it's really like an upgrade if you already have an existing one and really, really want the extra resolution, but that just depends on your needs. So, as you all know, my presentation is on virtual reality as an assessment tool. And to define virtual reality, it's a computer-generated scenario that simulates a realistic experience. What you see here is a modern-day head-mounted display. So you actually have this box that has monitors built inside of it, but VR, by definition, does not have to be this. The earliest paper that I found was from 1993, so looking at using virtual reality as an assessment tool is nothing new. There's just been a lot of very recent development in that area. And of course, that development is driven historically primarily by gaming. So every aspect of this has come mostly from that perspective of, can we make our games more immersive and make the player feel as if they're there? And one way to think about why VR can be a potentially powerful assessment tool is this analogy I thought of where when print came out, when you had the Gutenberg press, suddenly you can disseminate your information to masses of people. When you had radio, then you can share a message. With TV, you can share a vision. With VR, now you can share an experience. Oh, there we go, delayed. VR thus far has been used primarily for training, but training and assessment go hand in hand. The fields or industries that it's been used the most is in the medical and military industries. Within medical, that's primarily for surgeons, making sure that they do in fact have the skills that they need. So when they finally step into that operating room and you're the first soul that they're going to be operating on, they are in fact trained well enough and have passed a valid test to know they're not going to kill you on that operating table. For military, from what I've gathered, it's often been for operating and managing heavy equipment. So we're talking like airplanes that cost millions and millions of dollars. When someone is going to be flying that airplane or servicing that airplane, these are mission critical systems that cannot fail, or if you're going to be operating them, they're very complicated systems that you're suddenly put in charge of. Making sure that someone is not only going to be safe, but also not be damaging this very expensive equipment is of high import. And these fields have the resources to be building customized solutions, because up until this point, that was in the past few years, virtual reality has started to become commercially available. Many of these systems have been custom-built solutions requiring multiple engineers built for a very specific assessment or very specific training. So very, very expensive applications. With using virtual reality as an assessment tool, we're looking at transference. Can you go from training to real-world application? So you're looking at the construct validity of, did they learn what they needed to learn, and can this, as an assessment tool, judge that one way or the other, so that either we send them back for more training, or of course they pass on. So of the papers that I found, there were mixed results. There was nothing to indicate that there was a negative correlation between using VR as an assessment tool. Everything was either It wasn't significant, or it actually did help some, maybe not as much as we would have liked, but also with that in mind, or keeping in mind that most of the papers that I found were at least a decade old. And a lot of advancement has happened just within the past 5 years. So I took that with a grain of salt. The oldest study that I had was the one from 1993. That was the one that was inconclusive, or one of the ones that was inconclusive. But in one of the papers where they were comparing groups of surgeons that were trained either in VR or with a video trainer, so just watching videos of how to perform this surgery, after those trainings, they performed 10 of those surgeries in real life, and then those operations were recorded. Experienced surgeons blindly assessed, assessed and rated those surgeries. And even though the trainees preferred video training, it was the VR group that outperformed. They did better overall. The reason that VR has the potential as an assessment tool is ecological validity. That is, you're testing someone in a real-world situation or environment. You're testing them as they would be as they're performing it. So when Dr. Poole had us do our oral final last semester, that was in an effort to gain ecological validity. As he said, we're not just going to be writing stuff down all the time. You're going to have to sit there and explain to someone in a conversation what these things are. And that in essence, or that would be an example of ecological validity. Traditional assessments, being mostly pen and paper, have received criticism for diminished reliability, and that can be for a number of reasons: differences in examiners, testing environments, quality of stimuli, etc., and also criticized on their validity. So back to that use case scenario, we're not going to be writing down everything at our jobs. We're going to be actually talking to someone. In VR, you can enhance your reliability because you are in full control of that environment, and so every person that goes through that environment is going to have the exact same experience. Everything from the lighting to if they were simulating this room, where they were sitting in this room in relation to everyone else. You are in full control of that, and you gain reliability. Also in validity, you can quantify discrete behaviors and allow identification of specific cognitive domains. In the Kim et al. Study, they were studying unilateral neglect, which is where someone loses control over one eye because they have a brain lesion on the opposite hemisphere. So if they're damaged on the right hemisphere of their brain, their left eye suffers coordination. So what they did is they looked at traditional testing methods, which were pen and paper tests of bisection and cancellation tests. So bisection tests, series of lines, and they would ask the participants to take a pencil and draw a perpendicular line in the middle. So you're having to judge, where's the middle of this line? I'm going to put another line there. Cancellation tests, you have symbols, letters, numbers on a page, and they ask you to cross out all the hashtags, cross out all of a specific set of characters, and you're scanning and crossing out as many as you can find. For the VR solution, they had a 3D ball that the user would have to track as the ball moves in this virtual environment. So if you think back to as kids, like Follow the Bouncing Ball, for all the sing-along songs, it's that, but the difference is if you have someone looking at a pen and paper test, you may not realize when you create that test that what if, in part to their brain trauma, they suffer hand-eye coordination. So their hand-eye coordination may be attenuating their performance as they're trying to scan quickly and cross stuff out. Versus this simulation where there is no hand-eye coordination that's necessary. They are literally just looking around, tracking this virtual ball as they would objects in real life. Someone's walking, obviously someone's not going to be bouncing, but you right? Depends how good of a Friday night it is. But you're just using your head and your eyes, and that's it. And that's what you're doing for this test. Some of the pros, you're gaining ecological validity. You're only looking at the eye tracking. It brings in gamification, which essentially is, hey, this is more fun. I don't mind doing more of these tests than sitting there for just as long doing more of these pen and paper tests. And you're able to get a lot more measures out of this. You're able to see the deviation angle. So if someone says, yes, I'm looking right at the ball, in the software you can see if they're actually off and what that angle is and how much. So that in turn helps you to discern how severe that unilateral neglect is. Non-attention time, scanning time, some users would need a cue if they just totally lost track of the ball. An arrow may come up to indicate it's on your left or your right. How many times that occurs. And then failure rates. And when comparing the two, they were able to discern that there was a significant correlation to scoring on the previous test methods. So this is an improvement. Hey, we could correlate it to previous scores and get a much richer data set. Immersion is what brings the ecological validity to VR. And immersion is that, it's that how did I phrase it? It's that sense of presence that's established within a virtual environment. And that's brought together by all of the different inputs that VR brings to the table. The three biggest, of course, are video, audio, and haptics, or the tactile touch and sense. Mm-hmm. Video, you want higher resolution, more photorealistic environments. You can now have 360 audio so that as things happen in that space, you can hear where they're happening, whether behind or in front of you. And then haptics. In some situations, especially in games, you may have a vest that has air pockets, and as you're shot in these games, the air pockets deploy and you feel it. That's one extreme. However, for assessment, for a much more down-to-earth example of haptics, say you're going to be assessing if someone is ready for an upcoming job interview. You can simply have them sit on a real chair at a real desk, sitting across from their virtual interviewer, and so that they can lean forward or back at an actual table. And so haptics doesn't have to be high-tech, but when you have haptics in it, that builds that sense of immersion. Mm-hmm. You can have co-op simulations. There are scenarios of multiple people sharing in the same virtual reality experience. So even if you wanted to have that same interview process, but have the interviewer be a part of that, so you have this real person still sitting in front of you, they can still be represented in there. But now you can make it whatever environment you want, for whatever reason, depending on what you're measuring. This is an example. Hopefully it will play. I had some difficulty with it the first time around. There we go. This is a virtual environment, and I don't know if it plays that well on here, especially because it's a slightly lower resolution than the highest than what I wanted. But when you look at this on your computer, everything from the lighting to the resolution on how the couch bends and shadows are created, we're really close to having photorealistic environments. So while most of what you may have seen for VR is, again, very gamey, super bright colors, everything's loud and crazy and stuff blowing up. This is very achievable to put someone in a space, whether that's an apartment, as in this instance, or an office, or a job site.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just going around checking everything out. Now we need to get out. There we go. Perfect. So for measures, measures in part depend on the situation that you've built. So similar to the unilateral neglect, that deviation angle from the ball is specific to that use case. But that's something that you can just get from software and track over time or assess in the simulation. But you can also get biometric feedback, so heart rate, voice, amplitude, and pitch, heat mapping, eye tracking, completion time, errors. All of these, when you start to put all of these together, suddenly you can create a much more cohesive picture and understanding of what's going on. So for voice, amplitude, and pitch, if you notice someone's heart rate jumped during their assessment, and then you notice that they yelled, was that because were they angry or were they surprised? Well, you can look at the tone and pitch to help discern that and have software analyze that for you, and you can always go back and see what occurred since you're recording it. But you can have software help track and code a lot of those inputs from your user. Some of the research that's being done focuses a lot on measuring attention and memory and the different types of attention and memory, as well as logical reasoning, problem solving, executive functioning, critical thinking, and even emotional intelligence. So on a slightly lower end assessment, you can create situations in which someone is merely an observer of a conversation or social interaction, and even though they themselves don't engage in that, once they come out of it, you can then have them go through a test. So an assessment doesn't have to exist purely within the virtual environment. Again, this is just a tool. You can have them go through a simulation, observe a set of social interactions, and then ask them questions based off of that. What did you observe? What did you hear? What do you think? And use that to help gauge emotional intelligence. This is another demo, and this is Microsoft Azure Emotion API. Again, this goes back to coding. This is the original video that was recorded, and this is the software coding the emotion and to what degree of certainty it has. So 1 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. But it will track, or it will recognize anger, contempt, disgust, fear, happiness, neutral, sadness, and surprise. So you can have someone go through an experience, record their natural facial expressions, and then have the software help you code everything. And again, when you have everything together, this compiled with their heart rate, compiled with that voice amplitude and pitch, suddenly you're able to see, this is how they react in these situations, and have help in coding all that information.
Alex, how quick is this emotion recognition? Is it essentially, I mean, you said this is a recording, but is this able to do it fairly quickly, and is the reliability good from person to person, or is it better with some people than others?
I don't know how quick it is. From what I looked into, everything's pre-recorded. Okay. And how long it takes for it to code it afterwards, I don't know. Okay. And I would have to assume that you'd want to be shooting in a pretty high resolution for detail. And so the higher the resolution, the more data that is, presumably the longer it would take.
And then the squiggly image that was on the participant's chest there, is that for targeting so that the system knows where it is and what it's looking at?
Just reflect. I think that was just like
I think that's a drawing that she did.
Okay, well that could be it too, because I don't have my glasses on.
Yeah, this is...
Looks like a target for the image from here, so all right, cool.
This is certainly not as good a resolution as it looks on a screen with the projector.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, that makes me feel better.
As
not
far...
my old eyeballs, it's the resolution of our old projector. Okay, good.
Yes. As far as how well it works, they had a number of different examples. So this is a little black girl. They had a white guy in his 30s. They had a number of different ethnicities and age ranges that it demonstrated working on. I just grabbed this one because it was less
Well, and they're using the universally recognizable emotions, so that makes sense how they're doing it. I am intrigued about the confidence rating, how they do that. That's pretty cool. Because that's not level of intensity. It's not saying that this person's really happy. It's just telling you that I'm pretty sure this person's happy as opposed to just goofy. Okay.
And this one she only goes from happy to neutral back to happy the whole time.
Okay.
In the other video with the guy, he goes through a wider range of emotional expressions. So when I watched that one, it showed surprise, happy, neutral. And so you could see those numbers fluctuate as he was transitioning from one to the next. And I would anticipate that you can choose the time intervals between these readings so that if you wanted faster processing, you would only say, like, I only want every couple seconds. I don't need a reading every half second.
Right.
So you could cut down on, depending what your turnaround time needed to be between someone going through a simulation and then providing their assessment.
You do this for like experience sampling then, because you could like take a measure of their emotion every 10 minutes and then you could compile all those and see what they're, use it as a dependent variable or something.
Yeah, you can cut down your coding time, essentially, is what this is.
Well, and it's got really scary implications too.
Potentially, yes.
Because, I mean, if you pair this with the wireless EEG technology that I saw last semester or last spring, whenever that was, yeah, that's, because now you can look at brainwave activity, you can look at face activity, and then if you can tell when somebody's starting to get sad, and by having two good reliable measures, you can increase your reliability for both. Then you can start to actually manipulate that. So if you want people happy, you can start to actually do things in the environment that will make people happier. What's that? Nothing bad about it. No.
I heard that in China they have like mutual recognition for like weekends and something. They actually use it for advertising where they'll get an attractiveness score, and they say everybody's really attractive to something about the products, and then they actually use their face like to decipher what product you'd be most susceptible to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you did market research before, right? I mean, that's nothing new.
Yeah.
It's
It's different
new
tools.
except for the level of invasion.
Yes.
And so the reason I started to get really wigged out about it was that one of the chief executives of this company that had the wireless, I mean, it's high resolution. Was this last semester? Did I tell you guys about this? Okay, sure. Because I'm like, I'm having deja vu. I don't know if I told you or last year's group, but it was real time. It took them less than a minute to get it hooked up on the person, and he was able to actually manipulate virtual objects with his mind. And she was like, I really want to just hook all my employees up so I can see whether they're having a good concentration day or not a good concentration day. and I'm like, okay, that's getting scarier. And then she's like, because it'd be good to know that, so I know what we should be trying to do. And I'm like, yeah, you're saying that in a very nice, leadership kind of way, but we could also look at it in a very other way. and in a very, very negative way. And it's true. So for example, if I, in a consumer behavior context, wanted to manipulate you all to like a product more, I can do that. I mean, I can do that through old school classical conditioning stuff. I mean, that's easy. But now, if I had information on your actual brain waves and your processing and your actual emotions, I can just do it really quickly. And more importantly, I can do it beyond your awareness, which is what's the really scary part.
Yeah.
So do you like that product because it's a good product and you really like it? Or do you like it because I manipulated the background of the color of the preceding 3 screens to make you happier so that you would be more susceptible to liking this product when you look at it? This is why I live on a place where I don't have to see people. Yeah, I mean, I don't have neighbors that I can see because I don't like what people do. This is scary stuff.
I don't 100% trust EEG because the resolution is really, really low for that because it's on the outside of your skull, so it's like thousands of cells and all their activity.
Yeah, it's hard to get people to allow you to actually implant the electrodes
under
in
the
your
skull.
brain.
Well, yeah. But there you go. So I'm just saying
This was still, I mean, yes, it's lower resolution, but that's why it's like you can combine, say, a 32-channel EEG that's good, like these were scary good, and it's not like the old electrode caps. I mean, you've seen those, right, where you strapped in and they gel you up under each one of the, no, this is, I mean, it looks almost like a phone headset is what this looked like. And it was so fast, it was scary. And I mean, I've done EEG work before. I've actually got access to a really cheesy old school EEG and other psychophys equipment if we ever want to play with that, or if any of you ever want to mess with that, let me know. But the snag here is it's the having information about you that you don't have about you. Right? That's the scary thing, and that the computers or algorithms could use that information about you that you aren't aware of yet faster than you could be aware of it, and then change that reality before you were ever aware that there was a reality to be aware of. Because thinking takes time. Conscious awareness takes time. And computers are much faster at running through things than we are. Yeah, that's fine. In 20 years, when we all have implanted EEGs,
yeah.
You'll remember this conversation. Maybe you won't remember this conversation. They'll wipe that out. Yeah. But I'll still be on the farm with the goats, just laughing. Yeah. I'll just think I'm on the farm with the goats. So. Virtual goats. This turned dark awfully quickly. Okay. The point is, this is cool. This is, and what's neat is that all of these kinds of things are mimicking what humans can do. It's just doing it much faster, much more quickly, much more accurately.
Yeah, these are all tools. Because I guess maybe I should save that for the end. I do need to get through the rest of this, which I'm going to try to wrap up. So I'm going to fly through the rest of this a little bit quicker.
Cool.
And then bring up stuff as needed at the end. So some of the strengths, again, you have that reliability, you have ecological validity, it's reusable, so at any point you can, as soon as one person's done with it, you can just keep putting people through it as needed, but you don't have to go through the whole setup of a full assessment center, or maybe you could bypass parts of an assessment center, those that are more actor intensive, or you can reuse it for many times. It's scalable so that you can deploy it throughout a company regardless of location. You just have to have the hardware there. If you're using it in a training and assessment, then you can have an apprenticeship model where you go through levels of competency training and you don't encounter the next level of difficulty until you've mastered the current level that you're on. And that some of the tests have been, some of the studies that I read that did that were specifically for the surgical training. You're not going to do the full surgery, perform the full surgery until you've mastered this introductory portion. You're not going to dig deeper into the guy until you can do the first part right. Or something that crossed my mind that wasn't discussed in the papers, but even maybe you can do a surgery in a operating room under perfect conditions. We're going to put you in a virtual environment where you're on a battlefield, under fire, people running around shouting, multiple people need help all at the same time. Can you do the same thing with all of these outside stressors?
Under less than optimal conditions.
Right. So you have that range, but you can build that into the apprenticeship model. Weaknesses, you have upfront costs, which are drastically lower than they have been. However, a lot of the cost is now going to be in development. So for your specific need, you're going to have a team of artists that know how to build virtual environments, know how to build in those situations, that know what you're trying to measure so that they can appropriately build in those scenarios and factors to measure from. So if you're an organization that has an internal IT team that's going to be in charge of that, now you have to train them or find and hire people that are going to be able to help facilitate that and maintain it over time. So if you're doing this internally and you build the best model that you can for simulation, if it needs to get tweaked, if it's not as good as you initially thought and you need to go back and retool it, then your IT team has to be able to know how to do that. So current challenges, establishing the current tests the studies that I looked at were establishing validity for those specific tests. However, I would like to see some that I'd like to test the validity of the hardware itself. So not every situation is going to need the absolute most high-end rig that you can buy. I mean, some of these rigs, the rig itself is $100, and then you slap a smartphone into it, and there's an app that drives the smartphone to act as the display. So doing validation for what kinds of measures can be achieved through that, which would be a lot cheaper for companies, as opposed to which measures are going to require an HTC Vive Pro that alone is pushing almost $1,000, and then you have to spend a few more grand on the computer itself to drive that. So being able to show what measures require or do not require certain pieces of hardware. And that goes for the audio, that goes for the haptics. So finding that out. Standardizing latent factors. The big two that I saw were people measuring the different types of attention and memory. But can we build out modular scenarios that test specific latent factors so that rather than having to build one big massive simulation that measures everything someone's looking for, you have mini games in effect that you just say, oh, you need these, you need to see if you have these things, grab these different levels, if you will, and you go through them, even if they seem disjointed. You're measuring something very specific, and then you just grab those instances off the shelf. And again, virtual human interaction. So in gaming, it's called NPC, a non-playable character, but in some simulations, you may not need to interact with people. In others, you may in fact want your users to be able to interact. And so building in the functionality to do that, which can be done in a number of different ways. One is voice recognition. We have Siri, we have Alexa. Can we build those, can we tailor those to meet the needs within a virtual environment so that you could essentially go up to anyone in this simulation and talk to them, and then they give you a response back. Even if they're not important to the simulation and they say, I'm busy, I have to leave. Like, I don't have time to talk to you. You could see if someone's curious about their environment that they've suddenly been placed in and they're looking for help as you could in a normal environment. I've been faced with a challenge. Can I just ask someone around me, excuse me? So you can, again, build that immersion with voice recognition. Having the software packages that you can basically plug and play for your different measures you're trying to get, again, going back to modularity. Development, ease of use. So building out the software systems for internal IT teams to be able to tweak these more quickly. All-in-one hardware solutions. This kind of goes back to the HTC Vive. The new version of the Vive now has headphones, and apparently good ones from the review that I saw. But as of right now, you typically have to buy your headset, and then you have to go separately to go find a good set of 360 speakers. So the hardware right now is kind of all over the place. If you wanted heart rate tracking, you could buy an Apple Watch, but in the future, why not just put that into the headset, and you can measure against their temple. And so having a solution that you don't have to use everything in the headset, but it's all there already if you want to use it.
I think we'll get there. I mean, you look at
Yeah.
everything in the smartphones and in the different smartwatches we have now, they've got all of these features.
Exactly.
What's cool is people identify new ways to use those pieces of technology that we wouldn't have imagined a year or two ago.
Yep. So if a simulation were getting too intense and someone's heart rate was going, they just lost it, turn it down a little bit, and that can happen dynamically. And again, future improvement. And also real-time remote acting. So another video.
Hello, I'm Siren, and I'm a digital human. I was created by an international team of artists and engineers who wanted to challenge our ideas of what a synthetic human could be. I've got state-of-the-art real-time graphics and an unprecedented level of detail in my eyes, skin, and hair. Cool, right? But I'm more than just a collection of fancy pixels. I'm actually being driven by a real human actress and her dynamic motion capture through Unreal Engine. So what are you waiting for? Come meet me at the Vicon booth and see for yourself.
So that was not pre-recorded. There was a person actually doing all those movements, making those facial gestures, and this is what you get. Like nearly movie level quality rendering, but it's happening in real time. So even if you wanted or needed to have actors in your environment, but you couldn't or didn't want to, for whatever reason, in the future you're going to be able to have this interact with someone, basically live streaming with someone, but you're going to see them almost as if they were there. Again, that photorealism, but being driven by a person so you can still have that human interaction.
So you could be at home in your pajamas making money.
You know it.
Yeah.
While your self-driving car goes and makes money doing Uber.
Yeah.
So, Alex, she mentioned the Unreal Engine. It's come up a couple of times too. Can you share with people what that is? I mean, I know what the Unreal Engine is, but I don't know that everybody else does.
So the Unreal Engine is a game engine, and essentially it's software in which you can go and build a game. I have not used it yet, but it's on my list of things to look into, and I've seen people using it, and you can, I don't know how much is in the library, but you can literally just drag and drop objects. So what you look at is just grass or concrete, and it goes into infinity. And you then sit there as the editor and take, I want a rock here, I want grass here, I want a depression, I want water. And you sit there and you build a world.
And it also has pre-ingrained physics in it so that it behaves like it's supposed to behave.
Yep. And you get all sorts of lovely things like particle effects and smoke effects. And so, but again, it doesn't have to be fantasy or sci-fi stuff. If you don't want it, it can be that apartment. It can be that office building. And I've seen a number of videos online where some people build virtual penthouses, which is great for architects. If you have that client that's going to be buying, I saw today a video of like a $17 million penthouse somewhere around New York, and before you buy it or before you sit there and actually build the thing, you can build a near photorealistic representation of that, and then have the client look at it and say, yeah, that's what I want. So Unreal Engine is one of the leading game engine platforms, but you can use it for stuff like that, or for virtual environments. So future use cases, I would make the argument that you can use it for just about anything in the future with some of the future improvements. But some of the things that came to mind and or were suggested by the articles that I had was driving, both for newbies and for older people. Just saying. First, of course, for surgeries. Who wants to be the first person on someone's operating table? But one thing I also thought of that I've seen recently is why not have a full model of someone? I know for myself, it helps when I understand the specific thing I'm learning in the context of the whole. So if you're going to be understanding the human body, why not be able to have a full human body, and as you operate, you can then see how that affects the other parts of the body. And if you wanted to, you could pause and zoom in somewhere else, seemingly unrelated, but see how that's actually being affected. Almost like you could see the whole system even as you dive into certain parts.
Well, that could work for other systems as well. You could look at traffic, you could look at even like chemical production in, I'm thinking, refinery or in a Cheeto plant, same process, just one's edible.
Yep.
Where they actually do cooking in the pipes. I mean, they have to time it so that things are cooked and at the right rate in the pipes as they move from one component to the next. So you can see, lengthening or shrinking a pipe and what kind of impact does that have on your efficiency and final product.
Yep. Cool. Police training for situational awareness. One of the articles actually talked about using it as a tool for diagnosing and then prescribing medication, which was one of the articles that y'all got for the kids with ADHD, and that was one of the things they talked about potentially using it for. And then you have that virtual apprenticeship model where you can both implement training and be actively assessing throughout that training period. And that is it. Do y'all have any questions? Yep.
I know that can be really expensive. Is there a possibility that we can incorporate any of the stuff without the technology bit that's expensive? Like, can we make a standard environment that's an actual just room and then standardize everything so it's the same sort of ecological validity, but in the real world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really just depends what you want to measure, right? So for the emotional intelligence, you can, for the sake of that ecological validity and reliability, you can have someone observe a number of social interactions, maybe that are common in the workplace. Maybe your company's having trouble with certain issues with leadership, and you're looking for people to be able to identify those patterns of poor leadership. So you can have someone observe a number of social interactions and then come back out of it and say, what did you observe? Did you catch what was going on? What did you see or not see? How would you respond? If they are merely an observer in something like that, then you should be able to have a lower end rig. That's the argument I would make, but there's still validity that needs to be done specifically for the hardware.
Okay.
Because maybe that doesn't. So for instance, I think there needs to be validity testing on resolution, just to start out. Because resolution, what's the validity of going in the same test? Can we measure better what we're trying to? Can we still have that construct validity between the first HTC Vive and the HTC Vive Pro? Is there a difference? Does the jump in resolution make it enough of a difference in the immersion that we gain ecological validity and therefore we gain overall construct validity? That needs to be tested, but my argument would be or what I would assume is if they're merely an observer in something a little bit more mundane like that, you would be fine with one of the lower end solutions that's a phone and a headset and a pair of off the shelf headphones.
Well, it probably depends on not only the, but also the scenario and the context, right? Because I mean, immersion is a funny thing. You can be totally immersed in something, and one little thing can pull you out, right?
Yes.
You could stub your toe, and you're out of the immersive experience there because you're trying to figure out what happened. But the 78% increase there is supposed to help fix what they call it, the window screen effect, where you're looking and you see the individual pixels even though they're right up there in your face. And so for some people, that's going to be a detriment to immersion. For other people, it might not be. And there are lots of ways to create low fidelity but high immersion experiences in real life. You could do the same, I imagine, in this, right? I mean, we've all probably experienced in a game, we've had a game that's been, not that great in terms of what it looks like, but it plays really well. It plays very smoothly, and you're immersed. It's fun. I think of all the old 16-bit games that a lot of people learn to play on. But there are some games that are amazing graphics, but the interface is so clunky you can never really get involved to enjoy it.
Yes.
Well, I think another important aspect, something like that, is I played a game that came out a few years ago where it's relatively simple, right? Just WASD keys to move around the game, same thing to move through your commands for what essentially amounts to combat in the game. It's pretty much turn-based with a little bit of a bullet hell feel at the same time. So it has some really mundane aspects and then more motor skill aspects to the game's function itself. But it also had a really, it's 16 bits. It doesn't look immersive, but its quality of character was so, it felt like you had a connection to things.
Yeah.
And that's something that can increase the simulation as well too, is the quality of what that role play looks like between two people, or what NPC feeds you, right? That definitely is something that affects one's feeling of immersion for sure.
Yep.
Well, and that's one of the things that I learned doing social psych. A lot of our experiments, don't look like the real world. They don't have a whole lot of mundane realism to them. But they have to have experimental realism. They have to be engaging. They have to have people kind of suspend that disbelief. And so we went a long way to try to make stuff appear that way. So it wasn't like the real world, but people got caught up in it. And so, for example, one study I did, we had people interview to join a pre-existing group. And to make it more realistic and more involved for the participant, we videotaped their interview, right? And there was no other group, we lied, right? But so we wanted to make them believe that they were really going to get interviewed. And then when we gave them feedback later, that feedback was pretty realistic. But if they had thought too much about it, the whole thing would have fallen down. But we made it realistic, we made it engaging, and they got caught up in the experience there. And part of it is because they care, part of it is because there's just enough reality in there to make people believe it, and kind of keep working from there. But yeah, I think immersion is going to be a really important component for virtual reality training and assessment.
I have the Star Wars game that has the mask and everything, so you play with use lightsabers and stuff and try to go against people. But I think it's augmented reality. Is that what it's called? Where you're still in the room, but you have them right there in front of you. It's AR.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So would that be an option? Do you think that would still? Do you think it would be better or worse in the sense of trying to get inside that?
So for augmented reality, because you can still see the real world and what's around you, as of right now, I would say you're going to lose that immersion factor. It's really, I think AR is going to be fantastic for a lot of other applications. I mean, like a lot of other, pretty much everything, or at least have that potential. But if you're trying to build a scenario in which someone loses themselves and therefore their reactions are as they're the real thing. They're real, natural reactions. I don't think it's going to have that same validity that you're looking for.
I think maybe AR could be better for like team development exercises and things like that, having people be able to use a tool that they all have together, but for something that is could involve like complex problem solving you couldn't just do in any sort of situation. Because it heightens something that isn't exactly there, but that you would have to do together. You know?
And like part of it is talking to people and like stuff.
Like if you both had to like build something using like augmented reality, like your group of people had to like you know like common team building exercises in different like military organizations and things like that. It's like people have to move like large quantities of like barrels that are filled with water, so they're super heavy. They have to find a way to use like metal pipes and whatever else, like put them together essentially to be able to carry it from point A to point B. So you could do the same thing that wouldn't involve physical limitations, but you'd have to have people be able to use their brains together as a team to do something through augmented reality.
I also have another question.
Yes.
So you mentioned doctors like having to like watch everything. Well, they already go through a lot of training and stuff, so it's not like they just get thrown into the surgery room. They have to watch, they have to practice on cadavers, they have lots of other things. So do you see this as being something that replaces a lot of that? Or adding to it? Or like how do you see it fitting in with it? More or less?
Short term, it would be, I would see it as additive.
Okay.
One of the discussions that's in some of the papers was that of haptics, because if you're going to be operating on a body, you're going to be able to, well, not that I've done it, but I would assume you would be able to rest your hand, like you're going to put your hand on the body as you're cutting, right, to help stabilize your hand. In VR, you don't have that sense of touch unless you make a really specialized glove, and you know that sense of touch. How vital is that sense of touch to a doctor who's performing surgery? The weight of the tools, the way that certain tools rub against, either cut against certain pieces of flesh based on how much muscle is there or fat, you know, that's all sensory input through your hand that helps you decide how much pressure to apply, how quickly are you looking to slice, how, you know. So, as of right,
doing that in their classes before they get to that point where they're already like hands-on, like they integrate that into the classrooms, because they have already like 3D, like virtual, where they kind of cut the cadavers, like you could see them, like they break it apart virtually, so you can see everything that's there. So they're doing that while they're doing their.
Yeah.
yeah,
But
They would have a
I
leg
mean,
up once they got to.
first semester they get an entire like human cadaver themselves to like already go through it. So I just don't. I personally am like having a hard time seeing like how it would be helpful to like go through all that to get all the special gloves, all that stuff, when they could just sit there and watch and then slowly start helping and then going and doing it like in real life.
right.
But
For that, yes, that haptic feedback is a hurdle. And one of the tests, or one of the studies specifically addressed that. I'm trying to remember exactly what the outcome was, because I do not recall off the top of my head. But one of the problems with cadavers is you don't get to reuse them forever. So, and that therefore plays into cost, because you're having to constantly be acquiring new cadavers. And as a cadaver, that material or that flesh is no longer quite what it used to be. The flesh becomes more rigid as it sits in those solutions. Yeah, because you want to make it last, right?
Yeah.
So you try to preserve it, but in the preservation, you lose elasticity of the tissue, and so it's not quite the same. But you're right. That is a hurdle. That's one of the limitations for certain applications that, as of right now, the best thing that you could do is have some physical representation of that. So even what they're looking at, they may see the whole body, but have something else that's representative of tissue that has similar elasticity that they're actually cutting. But what they see is, oh, it looks and then feels like, you know, whatever surgery I'm trying to perform. And as a side note, I didn't put that video in for length of time, but there is a company that specializes in virtual but tactile experiences. So in short, imagine you're going, does everyone know Lord of the Rings? Okay. Awesome. So you're going to the Mines of Moria, right? Like in this virtual environment, you're looking at the Mines of Moria. But what you're going through in real life, it looks like Laser Quest because you are actually navigating a maze. So when you see a wall and you reach out, there is a wall. There is, in fact, a real wall. And in this virtual arcade that they have, you can do it with someone else. So when you look at someone similar to that Siren projected actress, you see the person, and in this Mines of Moria, there's a physical torch that you can. It's not a real torch, but in the game, you can grab this torch off the wall and then like light it on fire where there's a fire. And so there are people that are working to bring the two together in very engaging ways.
So that's kind of the reverse of what most people think of augmented reality. With augmented reality, most of us think that you're looking through the lens at reality and new things are overlaid on it. But
Right.
this is, the virtual world is completely what you're in, but there happen to be real analogs for things that you're interacting with.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so you're able to put in things in. If there's a fire, you just put a heat lamp. But now suddenly someone where they see fire, they still also feel heat. And there's a number of videos of people talking like, out of all the virtual reality experiences I've ever had, this is the most immersive because, and they talk about we're just employing essentially magic tricks into this experience to trick you into, you know, believing you're there. So it's tech, it's filmmaking, it's a little bit of magic, it's all of these things put together to accumulate into an experience that otherwise hasn't been achievable yet.
I want to add the conversation too. I think that virtual, to what you were talking about, I think it can help because even though it's not like an actual body, so you're missing the haptics and whatever, if you use a cadaver, the cadaver's not alive, so you don't get like the biofeedback. That's not the right term. You don't get the feedback from the body like, oh, this person's heart rate shot up because you did something wrong or something. And even though you can get that from practicing with actual bodies, there is, I think, something to be said about over-practice. And you can go through a virtual simulation as many times as you want and get over-practice to the point where you automatically react in ways so that when you're actually in a situation where you'd be under a lot of stress, you automatically do the right thing because you've been through it so many times. So, you know, maybe there's that. You know what you think about that?
Yeah, or even if you have the cadaver, building out that simulation where you're interacting with the cadaver, but you have all the other environmental factors that you would in a real operating room. So you can be having people talk around you, whether real or not, assist you or not. Maybe, you know, what do you do in an operating room if someone else barges in with another body that, hey, we need you to operate, like you're the only one here, and we need, so he's going to die if you don't help him. Like, suddenly you can create the situation of like, ethical dilemma. What do they do? I mean, and it's that freedom to be able to do that and create these situations where, sorry, that was a little bit off topic, but you can still have, you can merge both.
Yeah.
It just depends, again, as always, what are you trying to measure, and then figuring out what's going to be the best combination of these tools, because again, that's all that they are, they're just tools. How can you best get that measure?
Alex, I really liked your opening statement when you said that radio gave us audio and TV gave us vision and VR gave us experience, and I was sold on that.
He was like, where do I invest?
Done.
So I'll buy it. However,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious to know
Yes.
if there's a moral argument to be made here, because, you know, very often I've been told, don't go watch the movie, read the book. The book is a lot better. You know, and or, you know, reading scripture, for example, don't watch the Bible stories, just read the scripture and you'll get more out of it. So I'm thinking, you know, with VR, virtual reality, it gives us an experience, but is it robbing us of our own imagination? You know, is it robbing us of having our own interpretation of an experience based on our own imagination instead of just giving us an experience?
I like that question. I like it very much.
Yeah.
Because
I think for gaming and stuff it's really relevant, but I don't know if like assessment center, if you're using it to test for someone or train them, you don't care about their imagination. But in terms of like, sorry. But in terms of like
Please stop
actual,
just after you don't care.
yeah, it's like whatever. You don't need unless you need imagination for the job. That would be a totally different thing. But yeah, but for gaming and for like fun stuff, like what you was talking about, like going in the room, yeah, that might be a concern. Like you don't want to.
so
People, the psychological realism.
I would say yes and no. Everything builds off of everything else. You don't get the Dark Knight trilogy unless you have all of the previous Batman novels, and for better or worse, some of them are previous movies. But someone else came and was inspired by someone else's work and then built on top of that work. And you have games like, I don't know if you're familiar with Skyrim, but it's this whole massive world. You can literally walk anywhere in the world. And sometimes when I play that, I'm like, this is like a virtual version of Lord of the Rings. Like someone took someone else's work and built on top of it. So I've heard that argument, and I agree that there are people in the world that they only consume. And I think that's very sad because I've seen it. And I don't understand how people can live that way.
Well, what's interesting is that, it's not just, even when you're reading, you're consuming, but it's a different process. There's a lot more open to interpretation when you're reading, and you're more involved from a visualization standpoint in what you're reading. But you mentioned Lord of the Rings earlier. How many of you have actually read the books? Okay, that's what I thought, right? The rest of you just consumers. So, all right, but no, and so is the book better than the movie?
No, I'm just I don't know.
It's different.
It's different, right? It's different. And so I think that may be the answer there, that it's a different experience. That one type of experience is reading and digesting and thinking and imagining, but then this is a different type of experience. And as long as they don't supplant one another, then we're probably okay. This same argument, I think, has been had with every single form of mass communication, going back to Gutenberg's press, right? How can you really do this if now everybody gets books, right? Then all the way up through radio, and television. Television was a real game changer there. And then you get into computing, and you have far more. Yeah, I'm going to sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist. I keep talking, so I'll stop. That's not me, but it must have been one of those days. But it's that idea of being a good critical consumer of a variety of modalities. If all you do is eat McDonald's, you're not going to have a good life. Probably the same way here. If all you ever do is virtual reality, you're not going to have a good life. And so if you think about it from that standpoint, it may be a little easier to digest, unintended.
And within an assessment center, I said 9-year everything for application, but that may be a mix of things. It may not supplant everything in a I'm sorry, I said application, as an assessment process, but I think it can assist, or it will have the capacity to assist an assessment for pretty much everything down the road. Yes?
Are there any health risks with wearing a headset, or is there a time frame that's like considered too long? Because I know I wore one, and in like 5 minutes I said, I never want to wear this again. Like, how could you overcome a hurdle like that? Like, people not adjusting well or having headaches?
So that is that's part of the reason that virtual reality has started to hit people commercially within the past 5 years, is because they've started to overcome that barrier. And that motion sickness that happens is typically because of latency. So when you move your head, or you move it's moving your head, because you can look around independently of your head. But when you move your head and your world doesn't correspond with your head movement, you have that disruption.
Yeah.
Is it I forget the term.
Standard ear.
Yeah, but cochleal something.
Hopefully,
Yeah, that. So you know what to expect, and when you suddenly try to interact with this world and it doesn't respond how you're expecting it to, that throws off your cochlea, and so that's what causes motion sickness. It's like riding on a boat in a stormy sea. Your horizon is moving all over the place, and you're like, oh dear Lord, you just get sick, you get seasick. So
can you read in the car if somebody's driving? Not hopefully while you're driving. Okay, so that's what it is. It's that you're probably particularly sensitive to motion cues, and if those aren't matching up to visual cues, that's when you're going to get sick.
And so on the tech side, this is where like refresh rates come into play. You know, TVs for a while have been all about the most resolution. They're getting to the point that it's getting hard to tell one resolution from the other. It's like, do I need to spend an extra $1,000? But if you're a sports fan, what you will be sold on is the refresh rate, because that's how quickly that TV screen, all it is still images, right? You're just seeing them so fast that your eyes and brain can't tell the difference, so it looks like motion. But when you start looking at refresh rates, especially in sports, someone kicks a soccer ball really fast. If you're looking at 30 frames a second or 24, you see a blur, like it's a ghost trail of a ball, because it's moving so fast that what shows up on the screen, if you were to look at that picture, that still image, you see the ball across. Like, you see the ball in multiple instances, but it's all blurred. When you have a faster refresh rate, you get more of those images in the same amount of time. So now when you take a single image, you may, depending on the refresh rate and how fast that ball was kicked, you see that ball perfectly as a ball, not as a ghost trail. And so when you're able to do that, that's critical in VR, because you need to be able to track more quickly what part of the world do I show the user. That needs to happen more quickly. And then you're seeing that, and that's how you're able to match up what you should be seeing as you move and turn your head. So that goes into processing power of having a high-end computer to be able to manage that, and that's getting better. But that's part of why it's taken this long, because for a head-mounted display, that's one of the very first things that has to be addressed. So if you want to test it, though, go to La Cantera at the Microsoft store, and you can test out an HTC Vive. They have one there just sitting on demo. You can just walk up and be like, hey, oh, and they give you free drinks. Mm-hmm. Be like, I want a Coke, and I want to go check out your HTC Vive.
This is at the Microsoft store, La Cantera?
Yep, right across from the Apple store. Clean? I don't know, man. That's a good question.
Ultimately clean
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Bring your own can less. All right.
But if I recall, I believe they have a couple of different headsets, because Microsoft sells the computers. And so last time I went, they had a Vive, but they also had an Oculus Rift. And the Vive currently is the most high-end VR head-mounted display that you can purchase. The Rift is like number 2. So you can go, if they have them both still, you can go test which one works better and see what you like. So, any others?
Well, I've already tested the Vive. It was awesome. We had a student had one for a while and we used that. That was all.
Nice. Yeah, if there are no more questions, I will relinquish the floor.
Okay, so we gotta have a conversation. It's like 8:15 now. Who are our two speakers, Katie and Tasha?
Yeah.
So